Gym Wits, if you want to know the truth about fitness, from workout fads to diet myths, hitting pads, power lifts. Gym Wits, that's right. There's no guy out there wants bench tits, and we can't guarantee that you're gonna look great, but if you want to stay in shape, well, you better. Gym Wits. That's right, man. You tell 'em.
Welcome to the Gym Wits podcast. I'm Ryan George.
I'm Justin Guild, aka Chef Sonic,
and we are the Gym Wits. So I'm gonna just got an alert on. So I'm gonna tell you this because you're an MMA fan. So if any of our listeners are MMA fans, great. If you're not, you may want to fast forward like a minute or two while we discuss this. But it looks like the UFC and One Championship are making a trade. And again, this is weird, breaking news from Ariel Helwani. So he's, he obviously is a fairly trustworthy source, and he says that they're trading close to trading Demetrius Johnson for Ben Askren. I don't know any of the details. I'm just seeing this, but it's like at least the source is a legitimate source. It's not like you're getting it from some random.
It's very weird.
I think they might be dissolving the 125 pound title, which might make sense for the UFC. But yeah,
so maybe, but it's weird on many levels. First off, DJ is one of the greatest of all time, right? And just to sort of trade him is almost a little upsetting that they would do that. Right, someone who was really so spectacular, and quite frankly, I guess the last fight, I'm fine with Henry Cejudo winning that fight, even though I thought it was a draw, I really didn't like the title changing hands on a fight like that. It was so close, and Henry was awesome, no doubt about it, and I don't have a problem with him winning, but if DJ never really lost a fight, and he won so many in a row and was so dominant. And he didn't have a personality, and that's why they want to get rid of him, because he's not charismatic.
Well, although ironically, I think they say the same. Well, I guess Ben Askren is more his style is not the most fan friendly.
Well, now that's interesting, because first off, Dana, there was no reason for Ben Askren not to be in the UFC. Just in general, he's a mega talent. Yeah, he could be boring, but the idea is, I know it's sports entertainment, but if you are legit, you want to have the best talent, and Askren is an incredibly talented wrestler, and he's really good. So it seemed ridiculous that the UFC never signed him in the first place. And it's also a little weird because they could probably afford to buy him out of the contract without trading DJ. Now, look, I don't know the legalities of it, and I don't know what ONE FC, what they want to hold on to, but the whole thing just seems very weird.
I think
to me.
It makes sense in a way. I think ONE FC is trying to, I don't know what their aspirations are as far as in the U.S. market.
I guess it makes the most sense if you're right about them dissolving the 125.
Yeah, you have a situation where people just Mighty Mouse is probably, if not the most dynamic fighter in the sport. He's one of the most dynamic and one of the most interesting fighters in the sport. But I think, especially in the U.S., like just smaller fighters just don't sell. No matter how good you are, no matter your personality, people just don't seem to care if you're that size. And I think he'll probably have a lot more success in one as far as and I don't think it's ONE FC anymore. It's like one whatever, but whatever the case is,
whatever it is.
Yeah, he may have more success there, where maybe fans appreciate his skills more, appreciate him as a fighter more. So I think that in some ways maybe it's a good move for him. At the same time, for Askren, I think it makes sense for the UFC. It's weird because you'd think that between Askren and Mighty Mouse, of course, fans would love to see Mighty Mouse more, but I think Askren, because he's bigger, because he presents a real legit challenge to guys at a couple weight classes potentially, he'll probably
it's like kind of like immediately. Can he get down to 155?
Maybe not. But right? Connor and
the thought of him against either Ferguson or Khabib with his wrestling pedigree makes for an interesting fight. Yeah. And as we know, a lot of times when you get two really high-level grapplers, it turns into a striking
another
match.
Interesting dynamic is his teammate Tyrone Woodley is the champion. So, he's not gonna fight Tyrone Woodley. I don't think he's gonna fight him.
Of course he would.
I don't know about that.
Everyone will, if you get a chance to fight for a title in very, very rare.
I don't know about that. They're
very,
teammates.
very rare. Yeah, but that doesn't matter. That doesn't mean they'll have animosity. But look, you get a chance to fight for a title. You fight your friend, you fight your teammate, and you have respect, right? There are very, very few instances. Like people always say it, but when push comes to shove, when there's all that money and all that prestige, you'll do it. It's part of being a professional.
I don't know that I agree with that,
Look,
but
they even asked Cormier if he would fight Kane, and I don't know if I'm wrong.
No, you're wrong.
I thought he said he would. He loves Kane, but as professional,
he literally went down the light heavyweight just to not fight Kane.
I know
for
that
the title.
too, but
that's exactly what happened.
All right. So there are some instances. I thought that's not what I heard, and I just misheard. What you were referencing, because I had heard that too, but I thought that he had.
No, I'm pretty sure he never said that. I mean, it could be wrong, but all right. Well, okay. Now we'll get to fitness.
We could talk about that for hours.
Yeah, exactly. We could talk about that for hours. So, what do we have going on today?
Okay, so we have Shane Dowd, who is a flexibility and mobility teacher. And we know we've talked about it in the past. We've had other guests on that talk about this, but it's interesting because Shane is really an expert in the field, and he works with a lot of athletes as well as regular people to help them with their flexibility, their mobility, sometimes pre-injury, sometimes after. And it's excellent stuff. You guys need to know it because there's a good chance it will affect you, especially if you're playing sports or if you're sitting down in an office for too long. Definitely stuff you guys got to know. So enjoy the interview with Shane. Hey, everyone. We are here with Shane Dowd. How's everything, Shane?
Everything is great. How are you guys?
Very well. Now, Shane is a flexibility and mobility teacher, and we know that that's certainly been in the sort of the spotlight, as it's very important for a lot of reasons. I'm definitely curious as to how you got into that. But first, we always ask about your background. How did you get into fitness? If you played sports or you were into exercise growing up, or maybe you found it later in life.
Yeah, so I started out as an athlete. I played soccer in high school and in college, and pretty much played every other sport under the sun, but soccer was my primary sport. And I kind of got into health and fitness sort of like many high school boys do, which is basically to look better and to be buffer and to get girls and stuff like that. Mm-hmm. And then slowly it evolved over time into things like just being interested in how the human body performs and human biomechanics and training athletes and things like that. So after college, I studied nutrition and kinesiology in college, shifted to becoming a strength and conditioning coach and a personal trainer after college. And then eventually, after a series of kind of injuries that I dealt with, I got into the whole world of flexibility and mobility and physical therapy and healing injuries and things like that. So it's just kind of been a progression like that.
So do the majority of your clients kind of at this point, are they more athletes? Are they more people dealing with kind of post-rehab issues? Or like, do you have a specific type that you currently work with?
I definitely cater a little bit to the athletic population because that's more my background. But I have a program that helps people with hip impingement, or a condition called femoral acetabular impingement. And those people can range very, very widely from like 18-year-old athletes to like 60-year-old inactive grandmas. So there's a wide spectrum of people that help with that issue. But in general, what I teach flexibility and who I teach flexibility and mobility to is largely athletes, CrossFitters, weightlifters, bodybuilders.
Got it. So now, I guess you mentioned flexibility, and I think one of the more, we always hear kind of about flexibility, mobility, and range of motion, and they're often conflated with each other. So maybe if you can take a moment to kind of explain to our listeners kind of what the difference is between range of motion, flexibility, and mobility, and kind of how they're different and how it's important to understand the distinction between those.
Sure. Yeah, I like to keep things pretty simple for people because most people are interested in kind of the nerdy science of it all. So I kind of explain it like flexibility is just a joint's kind of passive range of motion, and mobility is more like flexibility with motor control. So it's flexibility that you control. It's ranges that you can control. So it's flexibility plus motor control. And an illustration of why that can be different is you can have, like, say, one time I was working with a very flexible female yogi who could do the splits, was just super bendy and flexible everywhere. But then I asked her to, do an overhead squat with a light bar, and she didn't have the motor control to know where to position her ribs, her pelvis. And so she ended up not being able to even do a full range of motion squat with a bar overhead because she was lacking the mobility or the motor control to control her flexibility. So she had all this passive range of motion, but she couldn't control it, and therefore her mobility was not that great. So that's kind of...
So I often say this, that in fitness and exercise, everything like that, there isn't really anything that's completely new. In certain sports, in certain types of workouts, people knew about flexibility and mobility, but what changes is how aware people are of it. So when Ryan and I were coming up, we knew that it was important to be flexible and mobile to an extent, but it wasn't nearly on the same level. So at what point did you notice that the whole concept of flexibility, mobility, and I guess sort of just being more functional in life with these things, when did that come into the public eye, and why do you think it came into the public eye?
It'd be hard to pinpoint an exact timeline. I know if I think back about my own journey as a young strength and conditioning coach, I remember guys like Eric Cressey and Mike Robertson and Bill Hartman, I think, and other people were kind of popularizing what at the time was sort of like, oh, this is new. It was like foam rolling, and like I think Eric Cressey had some magnificent mobility DVDs, and some people were starting to talk about self-myofascial release, foam rolling and stuff like that, basic stretching. But I think it started to really, really explode in popularity when Kelly Starrett came on the scene. And he started he's a doctor of physical therapy, runs a CrossFit gym, if people haven't heard of him. Really smart guy. And he started making a video every day about mobility topics. And I think he was at least definitely one of the big catalysts. And I'm not sure when it started. It was several years ago now. But I think he really started popularizing kind of mobility in general. I mean, gymnasts and martial artists and yogis have been stretching for long time. But mobility specifically has started to become more popular, at least in my eyes, around the time that Kelly Starrett started talking about it a lot. And then so many other people have started as well.
So when it comes to kind of increasing mobility, where do you see do you see athletes kind of making kind of common mistakes by athletes in general and by coaches even, and kind of what should they be focused on when they're intending on kind of increasing their mobility?
Yeah, there's several kind of mistakes that people make, and it kind of depends on where on the spectrum you are. Some people are already naturally so flexible and mobile that they really don't need to do almost any. In fact, what they need more is kind of like strengthening, stability work, motor control, stuff like that. And if they start stretching just because it feels good or just because someone told them they should, they might become hypermobile and can actually increase their risk of injury. So it's not like everyone in the world needs to be flexible and mobile, but a lot of athletes are on the other side of the spectrum, which is very stiff, hypo-mobile, not mobile, and they don't even have the adequate joint mobility to get into the positions they're trying to get into, like, say, an overhead press or a full range of motion back squat or something. So the question then comes, if you don't have enough mobility to achieve positions safely for your sport or for training for your sport, what's your plan to achieve those positions? How are you going to get into those positions? And it's usually some combination of stretching and massage and motor control training. And people need different proportions of each. I think that it used to be people were not doing enough mobility work, period, as a general rule of thumb. And then now, like many things, the pendulum has swung far in the opposite direction, and you get many people spending 30 minutes rolling around on a foam roller and not getting hot and sweaty before they work, which is also kind of a mistake. So it's either people are not doing mobility work and they need to, or they're doing too much mobility work and focus on like the tech in the gym and stuff like that, and they're emphasizing it too much at the expense of other things.
Yeah, no, so when it comes to kind of stretching and mobility work, is there, especially for an athlete, I think we see different kinds of stretching. Kind of have your old school kind of static stretching, dynamic stretching, all kinds of different protocols. Is there any one kind of protocol that's best for an athlete? And specifically, I guess if an athlete is having range of motion issues, let's say it's a martial artist that's having issues with the height of their kick, where should the focus lie on the technique and the mobility for that movement? Should it focus more on what muscles are involved? Like what should the focus be when you're dealing with kind of certain issues kind of related to a sport?
It's highly context dependent, so it's going to involve some degree of tissue work, meaning self-massage, myofascial release. So some amount of tissue work, some amount of stretching, and some amount of strengthening and motor control. For example, if this martial artist is going to throw a high kick, certain muscles have to be able to fire and coordinate in unison with his leg up. So he's got to have some strength and motor control there. But if his muscles in his groin and adductors are too dense, then they can't just be stretched through, so they need some kind of massage in there. And foam rolling your kind of deep adductor attachment points is not very effective, so this martial artist would need to learn which tools and which exercises specifically release the groin more. And possibly maybe his adductors or his leg muscles are not dense, they're just short and have never been stretched ever, and so maybe he needs to stretch a little bit more. So he can employ a variety of stretching techniques. I don't think that there's one that's always the right tool for the job. Some combination of Pnf stretching, proprioceptive neuromuscular facilitation, is usually pretty good for athletes because it gets their brain involved and it's not just kind of passively relaxing and waiting out the tension. Because just laying in a stretch and not moving doesn't make you move better. It sounds kind of obvious, but you'd be surprised at how many people are just passively stretching and never doing any dynamic stretches, never doing any Pnf stretching, never doing any kind of ballistic stretching or loaded stretching or other modalities, which all can be helpful. So it's very, very, very dependent, but it's some combination of massage, stretching, and strengthening.
Okay, so the sort of sidebar to this is, what about most people? They're like, look, I'm not an athlete. I don't need to throw a high kick. I don't need to do a complicated Olympic lift. I just got to go to the gym 3 days a week or 4 days a week or run a little bit. Most of the time I'm in an office or at a computer. I'm just doing my regular life. What mobility issues might someone of, like most of us, run into? And what type of stretching might be good for sort of the non-athlete, the non-professional fitness person?
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I mean, there's certain common things that people run into, like people start noticing their posture is slowly getting worse. I mean, this is why your grandma and grandpa look different than your mom and your dad look different than you, is because gravity has taken its toll over time. So in the upper body, you've got some upper body kind of kyphosis, rounded kind of turtleback going on, slumped shoulders, forward head posture. So that's a pretty common thing that I think most people need to learn how to at least slow down, if not kind of improve. So that involves things like thoracic mobility work, kind of restoring some motion in your upper back, a little bit of opening up of the chest so your shoulders aren't so slumped, getting your neck in a better position so that your head is actually aligned on top of your spinal column, not in front of it by several inches. So there's some kind of upper body postural issues. And then in general, most people have, tight hips from doing lots of sitting. I think even the average man these days kind of knows, sitting all day long for years and years and years is probably not a good idea. So learning some simple kind of mobility exercises for the hips is going to be really helpful for most people, especially if this person we're talking about, this theoretical person, is going to the gym. Because if you sit stuck in a frozen position with tight hips and bad upper body posture, and then you go into the gym and try to squat and deadlift and press things overhead, if you push it hard enough, if you're actually trying to increase the weights and systematically overload and maybe build strength and muscle, it's kind of like a car getting worse and worse alignment, but you're trying to drive it faster and faster and faster. At some point, the wear and tear will catch up to you.
So you're saying that if you're exercising, it's even more important for the layperson to really have their mobility, the flexibility in order.
Yeah, I think so. And I like the kind of analogy of a car. Like if you want to treat your body like a car, and you only are ever going to drive that car 20 to 30 miles an hour, meaning you're not going to play sports, you're not going to work out in the gym, you're just going to try to walk around and live a very simple, not movement-filled life, you probably can live most of your life without too much problems occurring. Of course, it's not going to be as comfortable and pain-free as it could be if you just included a little exercise and a little stretching. But theoretically, that person that's only driving their body 20 to 30 miles an hour doesn't need to tune up the car that much. But as soon as you start trying to drive the car 30, 40, 50, 60, 70, 80 miles an hour, you better be tuning that car up more so than someone who's driving slow all the time.
Cool. So now one of your, change gears a little bit, one of your specialties is corrective exercise. You're a corrective exercise specialist. So can you tell us a little bit about kind of what exactly is a corrective exercise specialist, and why, it's definitely an aspect of fitness, I think, that is overlooked. And so maybe you can tell us about what it is and why it's really important for people, and potentially for personal training clients, to have somebody who at least has some experience or knowledge with it.
Yeah, kind of in brief, I would say that a corrective exercise specialist is someone who knows specific exercises that can undo sort of the damage of daily life, or undo some of the damage that almost all of us have accrued from old injuries or sports or this thing or that thing. So it's just someone who can kind of help you counteract some of the negative things that have accrued in your life. It's not a physical therapist per se. It's just, I would say it's kind of like a personal trainer plus. Like it's like a personal trainer who has a little bit more a wider scope of knowledge of, they're not just going to put you through the same generic strengthening exercises that they put everyone through, because they might be able to tell that you have specific needs that sort of need to be brought up or strengthened before you can get into certain exercises. So it's kind of like in between a physical therapist and a personal trainer is where I would place a corrective exercise specialist, someone who can help kind of bridge that gap.
So what would be an example of a corrective exercise, maybe, and if you could create a little context for it?
Sure.
And also, does this start to border on prehab? Is this related to like a prehab exercise? Do they go hand in hand, or are they separate issues?
Yeah, they can be kind of lumped in a similar category. One really kind of popular example would be that I think definitely more fitness professionals know this. I'm not sure how many just average Joes and Janes know this, but we all in the fitness professional world know that sitting in general tightens your hip flexors and kind of turns off your glutes. So people have called this gluteal amnesia, or your butt stops working, or your glutes won't fire, or something like that. And this can cause problems if you then put this person who has really short, tight hip flexors and an underactive butt into like a squat or something, because they'll start to use other muscles to compensate. So they might arch their back excessively, or shift all the weight onto their quads, or they just won't use their butt. And therefore they won't be squatting in a symmetrical, kind of balanced way. So a corrective exercise prescription for that would be basically lengthen what's short, which is the hip flexor. So you might put them in a basic hip flexor stretch. You might do a little bit of glute reactivation, or maybe you include some barbell hip thrusts or some kind of very glute dominant movement into their routine, until you start noticing that they have a more balanced movement pattern in the squat, and then they don't need that corrective exercise anymore. So the goal is not to like do all these, namby-pamby, piddly little exercises all the time and never do the big hard stuff like squats and deadlifts. The point is just to make sure that you're doing the big stuff correctly, and if you're not, then you apply a little bit of prehab, little bit of corrective exercise just to kind of bring things back in balance. It's kind of like a bodybuilder who notices, like, maybe their chest is a little smaller than normal, and so if they just keep bench pressing, they're not going to build their chest, and so they do some isolated exercises for their chest to kind of bring everything into symmetry. That's kind of what corrective.
So great. So that's an awesome answer. I think it really helps kind of clarify kind of what it is and the importance of it. So now you mentioned earlier, and I wanted to talk a little bit about this, the FIA impingement. So can you explain kind of what it is and why it's something that people should be aware of?
Sure. Yeah, FAI stands for femoral acetabular impingement, which just means hip impingement, and it's something that I struggled with several years ago, and it's kind of what led me into this whole exploration of rehab and prehab and corrective exercise and flexibility and mobility, because my body was such a mess that I had to do something. So I tend to get obsessive when I get interested in something, so I got way into it and did hours and hours a day of corrective exercise and stretching and mobility and all that stuff. And then I started talking about it and making videos about it, as did my business partner, Matt Shu, who's got a great business, Upright Health, and a great gym in San Francisco. But we both started talking about this FAI stuff and noticed that there was an unusually large interest in it. And it turns out that more and more people in recent years have been getting the diagnosis from physicians and doctors that they have this hip impingement problem. They've got hip pain. And so we just started making more and more videos about it. I started sharing more and more about what helped me kind of overcome it without surgery. And it's really taken off. And so we now help a lot of people around the world that are dealing with hip problems, but specifically hip impingement, femoral acetabular impingement problems, which also come hand in hand very often with things like labral tears and all kinds of other problems. So that's kind of what FAI is.
What are there any kind of signs that somebody might be, dealing with it, or what are maybe common types of pain or areas that they may feel that, like that, where somebody can kind of identify maybe this is something I should get checked out?
Yeah, it can manifest in quite a few different ways, which is why it can be so kind of confounding for people. Because for me, for example, it showed up as like recurring SI joint problems on my right side. So I was like, why is my right SI joint always getting flared up when I squat or when I do Olympic lifts or something like that? And it turns out that my hip didn't have full range of motion to get into a deep squat position, and therefore my low back was hiking up and compensating, and I was kind of shifting away from the problem, trying to avoid it. But it was very, very subtle, but it was still enough to kind of keep tweaking and injuring my back. Other people experience pain in the groin, pain in the hip crease when they squat, pain when running, pain when sitting in the glutes. It can show up, and it's not like there's one area where pain manifests. It can literally be in the groin, in the glutes, in the low back, but often it comes with a limited range of motion in that hip, the one that's sort of being the problem child. And so people can go to a physical therapist and get kind of scanned, and they'll do different tests, like a Faber test or a Fader test. There's all these kind of specialized tests that sort of tell you, okay, there's something going on in the hip. And then, of course, you can get x-rays and MRIs, which will tell you a little bit about how the bone is and how the labrum is. But the big danger with all of those sort of tests is that almost everyone shows up with some level of abnormality in their bone structure, say, but it doesn't correlate that well with pain and movement restrictions. So, for example, myself, I have what's called cam morphology in my hip. I have a labral tear. I have a cyst in my hip. There's everything wrong in my hip, but I can do the splits, and it's because I've worked on the muscles and the motor control and my movement quality very diligently over a long period of time, and therefore, even though I have, quote, bad bones, it doesn't mean that bones are the only factor in hip health. And so that's kind of what we talk about in the FAI Fix. We say that there's a lot of other factors that are involved in hip health not just the bone structure. So while you can get tested by a physical therapist or X-ray or MRI, I would highly, highly caution people to don't take it as the end-all, be-all, like this is a death sentence if something bad shows up, because there's many, many, many people who have horrible-looking hips when they get imaged, but they have no pain or restriction. So it's good to focus on what you have control over, which is your muscles and your motor control. And then if you've maximized your muscles and your motor control, meaning you've gotten flexible and mobile, you've softened up muscles, you've stretched them, you've strengthened things that need to be strengthened, and you still have problems, then of course maybe you consider something like surgery, but it definitely shouldn't be the first option.
Cool. Now, yeah, I guess that was going to be the question. So now, how do you approach it with a client that is dealing with it as a trainer? If, let's say it's a situation where surgery maybe is not on the table. What's your approach to a client dealing with that with an FAI impingement?
First thing is to kind of find out where they're restricted, where they have pain, find out where they want to be. So you kind of find out where they are and where they want to be. And then you start kind of running them through different screens and find out where they're most restricted. So for example, like checking their hip internal and external rotation or flexion, or checking like full body movements. If there's someone who needs to like squat and lunge and cut and move, find out where they hurt, where they're restricted, where there's pain, and then you take them through a series of exercises in those main categories we talked about before, which is you show them how to massage various muscles in their hips, show them how to stretch various muscles, show them how to strengthen various muscles, over time able to kind of put down what are like the best exercises for that person. Usually it's a little bit of a troubleshooting process because it's a very complicated issue and no two people are exactly the same, but we have found very good success with people being in either one of two categories. Either they're very not flexible, very not mobile, and those type of people need to do a lot of tissue work and stretching, or they're hypermobile, they're hyper flexible, and they still have pain and problems. Those kind of people we tend to give more stability, motor control, glute and core strengthening and control, learning kind of how to subtly control the position of your pelvis in all positions and movements, retrain your deep core muscles and stuff like that. So you can either be very stiff and tight or very flexible, and you'll get a slightly different approach, but it will always be some combination of tissue work, stretching, and re-education or strengthening. So we call it kind of the TSR approach to this, the TSR system.
So now, would this approach be similar to the way you might work with a client that doesn't have a hip impingement but might be at risk for one? So you're almost trying to prevent them from getting it. Would you sort of approach it the same way, or the different exercise in a different way? Okay. Yeah,
it's still those kind of three categories. Like if someone shows up to me as a trainer. I'm a trainer in a gym, and someone says, I want to get in shape, I want to exercise, and I take them through an evaluation to kind of see, what is the alignment of this particular car that's showing up, and I find out, wow, they've got super stiff ankles, super stiff hips, terrible posture, no shoulder mobility. We're going to have to do something to increase their range of motion. Otherwise, we can only do exercises with like half range of motion. Otherwise it's going to be unsafe because they're going to compensate somewhere. So the approach is basically the same, but we don't have to deal with the pain component if they don't have that yet.
Cool. All right. So I have an out of left field question for you because you're a former athlete. You work with a lot of athletes. We see so many injuries in professional sports nowadays. So there's a bunch of reasons for this. First off, the science and the technology is better, so they're aware of more injuries and they're aware of more things that can go wrong. It's also athletes are enormous investments from franchises, so they want to make sure they get the most out of their investment. So if there's any risk of anything, they'll go through X-rays and MRIs and everything, and they'll sit them and make sure that they don't play just to not risk maybe making it injury worse. But putting all that stuff aside, do you feel that there are more injuries in professional sports than there used to be? Maybe, or did the athletes just used to play through injuries, or take more risks? Do you think there are more today? Is it possibly due to training, or what do you think? What's your opinion on this matter?
I mean, that could be a very, very. There's got to be multiple reasons for that. I don't follow professional sports closely enough to know if that's true or not. But I mean, it could be, that. I hate to throw my own sort of like industry or field under the bus, but I do wonder if kind of the trend towards corrective exercise has been at the expense of just getting athletes really well conditioned for the rigors of their sport. Yeah. So we kind of touched on this a little bit earlier, where I said some people in the gym will, spend 30 minutes on a foam roller and they won't get hot and sweaty. And I don't know if this is happening at the professional level or not, but it is possible that some people have kind of taken the corrective exercise, stretching, mobility thing a little too far, and they athletes only have so much time to train, and maybe what would be more injury preventative would be just being in really great shape or conditioning your muscles to handle the eccentric load of jumping and landing better. So I know some of my other kind of strength and conditioning friends, that's sort of their mindset, that people are spending too much time rolling around on lacrosse balls and not enough time training hard. So I think that's definitely one possibility. I'm sure there's many more, but I don't think I follow professional sports closely enough to comment.
Okay, cool. So you have a couple websites. I think if you can tell our listeners a little bit what the different websites are, how each one is used, and then share how people can get in touch with you. Sure.
So we talked about the FAI Fix, which is that program about hip problems and hip impingement. So the website for that is thefaifix.com. And that's specifically just two programs, the FAI Fix Basic program and the FAI Fix for Athletes program, which is a little bit more about if you're an athlete with hip impingement, how do you still train like an athlete, not lose all your gains, but also don't make them worse if you've got these specific hip problems. And we usually insist that even if you are an athlete, that you start with the basic program, just so you're familiar with kind of our basic theory and the basic exercises. And then after about 2 months, you can jump into the athletes program if you want. So thefaifix.com, or my other website is kind of my main brand is gotrom.com. ROM, R-O-M, as in range of motion. So gotrom. And that's where you can find almost all my stuff, and you can find my blog and social media and all that good stuff.
Nice. Awesome, Shane. Well, thank you so much for coming on the Gym Wits. Really great information to know, and we hope that our listeners, pay attention, because for the athletes and just for the lay people, this is important stuff.
Yeah, thank you so much. I enjoyed it.
Great. Thank you so much. It's so funny. Every time I hear something like this, and I hear an expert talking about things like flexibility, mobility, range of motion, injuries, I always tell myself, I'm got to start stretching. I got to do all different types of stretches. I got to do more foam rolling. I got to do all these things to make sure that I don't get injured, or that I'm able to maintain the lifestyle that I want.
Yeah, and I think every year you get older, there's more of an impetus to really do so. It's just hard when you're not.
It's not that
born
hard.
with it. It is in a way. I mean, it's not hard.
If to put in at the gym or whatever an extra 10 minutes into extra, whether it's extra stretching or mobility training, stuff like that, is really not that hard.
Okay, so you're gonna do that, right? Exactly. Yeah.
The fact of the matter is, it's boring to me, and
so that's what I meant by it's hard. I mean,
right.
I didn't mean like it's physically,
but it's
hard.
just I know, but it's not that hard. It's laziness. So I don't think that laziness is an excuse. It defines something as being hard. It's not hard. It's I'm being lazy.
Both.
Well, yeah, I'm not a lazy person, but In this case, I am.
Yeah.
It's just
I think
the
it's something
importance
we all need. So if you're young and you're starting to exercise, include recovery in your workouts. Like include 10 minutes where you cool down. Like cool down I think is important a few different ways, but I think the most important thing with the cool down is really just to kind of get your mind set on kind of the recovery portion and doing the stretching and movement. And I mean, well, that's the thing is like, it could just be your recovery, but it could be that you need to do certain things before you work out, but definitely take care of your bodies and don't look past, even if you feel like $1 million after workout and you don't have to stretch, you don't have to foam roll, you don't have to do anything. Start early because you'll get to a point where your body does not want to cooperate. And I think that's one of the biggest things as a trainer that I've noticed with people is as you get older, your fitness level and your output can remain pretty high. I have clients well into their 50s, 60s, 70s that perform at a high level. The difference is that the body, as you get older, doesn't want to cooperate. And so if you don't put the time into the recovery, and if you don't really make that a priority, that's where we can see, problems develop because you're not giving yourself that time to recover. And then, it's kind of as you get older, the output again can stay the same, but then the injuries pile up. And then if you can't overcome those injuries, your output then diminishes. So, start early and just kind of keep that in mind so that as your body starts to, you get hurt or you feel a little tweak or you feel something weird, you can kind of work through that without being in the situation where we're at, where it's kind of like, I feel a pain in my leg and I just don't want to, even though I know better, it's like, I'll leave it alone. It'll get better on its own. It shouldn't do that.
So you have even more opportunity than me to do these types of exercises. You're at a gym every day and you get little 15-minute pockets here and there. So are you going to?
Well, I should. I do stretch when I teach, like when I do warm-ups, I have,
Sure,
stretch.
yes.
So I do actually stretch a couple times a day, but there's specific things I really need to be doing that I don't do. So I should. And one day I will. I'm definitely feeling the aches and pains, and so I really should be doing it, but we'll see how that works out.
Yeah.
All right. Well, I guess that's it. As usual, all of our stuff is on the Gym Wits, gymwits.com, all of our Facebook, Instagram, all that good stuff. That's it. So I'm Ryan George.
I'm Justin Guild, a.k.a. Chef Sonic, reminding you that truth does not sell.
And we are the Gym Wits.